So before I go any further, I just want to first acknowledge the passing in December of John Cobb Jr., whose theological work has influenced so many of us. We were talking about him earlier in our social time. We, the Center for Process Studies, Process and Faith, were planning to celebrate with him his 100th birthday in February. But sadly, he didn't quite make it to that birthday. And he will be greatly missed and did so much for so many people to renew their faith. So I just wanted to acknowledge him. Now, our hopes for this event, this Renewing Faith Conference, are that you will leave refreshed in your spiritual life, and that what we all do here will hopefully spark some new ways of thinking for you, ways of thinking, ways of expressing, and ways of living out your faith. We hope that your theological roots grow deeper. We hope that you gain fresh perspectives on ministry, that you find new ways, again, to embody your faith, and that you might also make some new friends and build lasting connections with others here in this conference. So again, don't skip out on the breakout sessions, because that's where you'll have really the ability to engage in conversation and also be part of the Facebook group. Join that and join the discussion there and make those connections there. Now, we want to have this event to have more of a conversational focus and to bring in different voices. So other than the keynote conversation that I and Bruce Epperly will be having this evening, all of our spoken content will be through panels that will each focus on a certain theme. Now, as we pointed out in the program book, we want you to feel free to take additional breaks when you need them. We're on Zoom for several days, so we've got breaks scheduled. But if you need an additional break, take a break. Also, you can feel free to eat or drink while you're watching or listening. We would just ask that you be sure to turn off your video camera when you're doing more private activities. We don't want any of those horror stories that have come from other places sometimes. It's also in the program book, the PDF of the program book, where you will find the session descriptions, the full schedule, and the bios for all of the speakers and other contributors to this conference. We have a lot of just wonderful, wonderful contributors. So all of those resources are in the participant portal. And so be sure to check your email for the link to that participant portal if you've not gone to that yet. Now, another thing that was really important to us in planning this event is that we wanted to give everyone multiple opportunities to get out of our heads. And we didn't want, because we don't want to just think about good ideas, but we want to explore how we might apply them in practice. And we're also bringing in music, art, and movement. So there'll be opportunities for you to do some chair yoga tomorrow and Saturday, first thing, to participate in a worship service here online, and to also try some sacred body dance tomorrow night. Also to reflect on what you've been hearing through observation of visual art, and to allow music to drop us down deeper into our soul depths. Now, for the best experience of this conference, we think that you'll want to have your workbook printed to use what we're calling the experiential immersion pages to take some notes. Now, if you've not printed your workbook yet, that's fine. Just, maybe have some blank paper tonight. But we would encourage you to print the workbook tomorrow, so that you have it for tomorrow, or tonight, so that you have it for tomorrow and Saturday. And there are prompts in this workbook for each session that we're encouraging you, again, to just get out of your head and put some things down on paper. So we've got 4 prompts, 4 different kinds of prompts. First, insights and instigators, which we're saying is if you have a new awareness come to you, or an idea that you want to explore further, write that in that section. Relations and resonances. There you might note down conference contributors and attendees that you might want to connect with on social media. So who are those people that you notice that you want to look for? Embodied wisdom. So you might record anything that arises from your bodily feelings. So did something make you feel tight in the throat or the stomach, or a constriction in your heart, or did you feel a sense of expansion? So you might want to write that down just to mark that and reflect on that. So also in that same workbook at the very beginning is the worship program for our Friday evening worship. So it's easy to find. It's right there in the beginning. So you might want to print that, because there'll be readings that you'll be hearing, things you'll be saying, and songs there that we'll all be singing. Now, all but the readers and song leaders will be muted, but you can still do those things at home. Now, as I mentioned before, these PDFs for the program book and the workbook and worship program are all in the participant portal. Now, we set the link to that in your emails that you've been getting, and also the password to that portal. That went out in email. And I want you to be sure to note that the password for the portal is not the same as the password that, if you're a PNF member, that you would use for that membership account. So the website might automatically populate your PNF member password in that field, but you want to put in the Faith Renewal 25, all lowercase. That's the password for the portal. That's what you want to put in that field, or else it won't let you in. So again, we want to welcome you to this Renewing Faith Conference. What we want most of all is for you to feel renewed, to have fun, to experience joy, and to be inspired by beauty. Now, before I bring up Bruce to engage in a keynote conversation with me, there's a song that I want to play. I mentioned there'd be a lot of music. I'll be doing all the live music for this conference this time, but when we do these in the future, I hope we can do some in person, and then I want to bring in other musicians as well. So for now, it's just me on these. When I was a student at Claremont School of Theology, I was in an eco-process theology class with Roland Faber, and we read all kinds of amazing people, from John Cobb and others, to other process thinkers, to eco-feminist theologians, to Teilhard de Chardin, and just so many interesting people. And so we were given the opportunity in our midterms to do a creative project. And so I wrote this song that I consider to be a hymn called We All Are Related. And it begins with what I would envision would be a choral chant that tells the scientific creation story. And then it moves into the congregational part. Now, we'll be singing this during the worship tomorrow night. So you'll hear it now, and then the words are in the program book, and you'll be hopefully wanting to sing along with me tomorrow. But so it starts with, again, what I think I hear is a chant. It'll be just me. But then we'll go into the other part, and I think you'll find it to be a song you would enjoy singing and pick up pretty quickly. Fiery brilliance, cooling gas, condensing gravity, atoms forming stars, and carbon fuel diversity. Earth with sky and oceans, molecules then multiply. Stardust is the matter of the cosmos and all life. We all are related, woven as threads in Earth's tapestry. A kinship creation depending on all deep harmony. Eternally formed by each other, creative and free, we all are related, wholly and actively. is luring us there. Grace within chaos, the power of the new, holiness bear. The singer is singing the song we are yearning to share. The world is becoming processes everywhere. God is embodied, word become flesh, all that we see. Deeply incarnate in every bird and every tree. In the heartbeat of billions of bodies just wanting to be, God is embodied, soul of the world, breathing in me. And all things have value, all the way up and all the way down. God is redeeming the lowliest stone and the glorious crown. Christ is the pattern in every atom around. All things have value, whispering spirit sound. We need liberation from seeing our world as dead matter machines. All creatures as neighbors, a healing embrace, so held we are free. In training our rhythms to the heartbeat of life, consciously we all are related. In a world that's becoming, where God is embodied, and all things have value, we are liberated, affirming the world we see. All right. Thank you for listening. So now we need to bring Bruce Epperly into the conversation, although we will each be doing some of our own comments separately. I'll do some first because I think that what I'm wanting to say kind of tees up what Bruce is interested in sharing. And then after we each share our comments, our opening statement, then we'll be in dialogue together. So with that, this is on the topic of renewing faith, which is the broad theme of our conference. And when we say renewing faith, what do we mean by that? Well, when it comes to language for programs or events, I love using gerunds, those words that end in ing, because they have a double meaning. So when I use the term renewing faith, I'm thinking both of a type of faith that renews us, renews our spiritual lives, and also about the ideas and practices that might help to renew the whole experience of faith itself. Now, we might ask if such an endeavor is even needed. Isn't our culture too secular, long over the kind of Christian faith that people used to center their lives upon? Many of us have seen the very sobering statistics about the huge shift away from religious identification and attendance at worship. In fact, it seems that the decline in worship attendance was even put on overdrive by COVID. So, we've all heard about the religious nuns and the spiritual but not religious. Some of us may even have begun to think of ourselves in those terms. But I think people are hungrier for the sacred now, more than they ever were. Now, in my doctoral research at Claremont School of Theology, I was looking at the issue of fragmentation in American and Western culture. So when I look around, in the US especially, I see that we are a fragmented people at all levels, societally, interpersonally, and intrapersonally, meaning within ourselves. We see evidence of this fragmentation in our politics, in our polarization, in our loneliness, and in the way that early life trauma has been shown to affect our physical and mental health, which signals a split within us between our physical and our mental health. We're not whole, and we don't typically see ourselves as in relationship to this whole-making cosmos that I'll be singing about later in this event. Now, I place much of the blame for this fragmentation on the shoulders of the fragmenting worldview that we're swimming in our culture. The story that we tell ourselves about the world is dualistic, mechanistic, materialistic, and dismissive of anything that we think is non-rational. But everything we love about life, love, art, beauty, meaning, purpose, dreams, and transcendent experience is non-rational. It's not only the story, though, that we tell ourselves about the world that is unsatisfying. The story that we've long heard about God and God's relationship with the world just seems to fall flatter and flatter every year for many people. Not for all of us, but for many people. Now, my friend David Tacey, who's a scholar in Australia, has a wonderful book called The Post-Secular Sacred. And in this book, he talks about a threefold pattern that he sees in Western societies as a whole and also in individuals. That pattern begins with religious consciousness, where the faith of our families and our communities is just accepted by us and believed in without much question. And this might have been more of a past phenomenon than a present phenomenon. That's the first part of this pattern. Secularism is the second part of the pattern. And that's where there's a search for knowledge that is driven by logic and the intellect. So M. Scott Peck wrote about ideas similar to this. And he talked about this stage of secularism as the skeptic or individual stage of spiritual development. It's in this kind of part of the pattern or this stage of life where we question everything and we critically evaluate our religious systems. And that often results in a healthy process of deconstruction or a kind of taking apart of our inherited faith beliefs. And it may even result in outright atheism for a lot of people. What's really interesting is that Tacey talks about atheism as a crucial and necessary step in the paradoxical recovery of God. That's because many people find that the assumptions of postmodernity and its tendency to smash belief systems ultimately doesn't satisfy our seeking minds and searching hearts. We are restless in our spirits and searching for meaning. So Scott Peck wrote about the stage after the skeptical stage as being a mystical and communal understanding that he thought is marked by a heart-based search for knowledge, not so much an intellect-based search. So in this stage, Peck says we return to the myths and stories, but we see them in a whole new light. Now, for David Tacey, the third part of the pattern he sees is what he calls the post-secular sacred. Now, that term is not, for him, a reactionary term that's calling for any kind of misguided revival of dogmatic orthodoxies. Instead, he sees it as a progressive term, calling for the renewal of the religious enterprise from the resources of contemporary theology, science, and philosophy. So those of us who have gathered here in this conference to explore these core themes of Christianity from a process and open and relational perspective, and to share those perspectives with all of you who have joined us, many of us can say we've experienced within our own lives that kind of renewal. So when we start to think with philosophers like Alfred North Whitehead, or theologians like John Cobb, Monica Coleman, and Tom Ord, or ecofeminist theologians like Sally McFaig and Rosemary Radford Ruther, or evolutionary thinkers like Pierre Teilhard de Chardin and Ilia Delio, our faith can come alive again, and then it speaks not just to our minds, but also to our hearts. And so it speaks then in words and also sparks feelings that can live in harmony with our experience of God and the world, and in harmony with what we see from the scientific pursuit of knowledge. So I agree with David Tacey when he tells us that we're living in a very different spiritual landscape today. He said that religion has morphed into something other than what it was. Heaven is not a place in the sky, but a metaphor for a transcendence found in creation. God is not a magisterial being out there, but the incarnational spirit of the world. The cosmology of religion has been deconstructed, and a mystical vision of the closeness of the sacred has replaced the distant divinity of the past. Now, I spoke earlier of fragmentation, that we are a divided people living in a divisive culture that pulls us apart at every turn. But when I dove deep into process relational theology and Jungian psychology, my two passions, I found thinkers that described reality at the levels of both the cosmos and of the human psyche as being integrating, not fragmenting. I found an understanding that both cosmos and psyche at their core are marked by value, by relationality, and transformation. And then I've also found that we can experience that reality for ourselves in a way that shows us that we matter, we belong, and we can experience positive change. Now, I've seen that to be true in my own life. Early on in my life, I accepted the teachings of the church. But then I was exposed to modern science, to quantum science, to Eastern philosophies and studies in consciousness. I studied theology. I also read Bible Archaeology magazine way back when. I fell in love with the medieval mystics and came alive when I read Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, a Jungian analyst. I began working with my dreams in a spiritual way and discovered God at work in the depths of my being. So I know that it's possible to not just embrace a better worldview, but to experience the reality of that view at the heart of my own life. I know I've been renewed, and my faith has been renewed over and over again, because I've been through those dark nights of the soul as well. And I hear stories from other people in this community who have also been changed by what they've discovered when they were willing to question and willing to be renewed. Now, many of those people are here in this conference, ready to share with all of us the ways in which they've brought renewing ideas about faith to life in their own congregations and communities. They too have found that when we can approach the old themes in fresh ways, our lives and our communities can be renewed and made more whole. And that's critically important because it's not enough just to be changed as an individual. We want to become those vitalizing people that Joseph Campbell spoke of in The Power of Myth, who vitalize and transform the world around us too. This world that is so lonely, angry, and despairing needs us today. It's crying out for renewal. So at this conference, I hope that we can talk about the ways in which we might also become renewing influences. So, Bruce, what would you now like to share?
Oh, quite a bit, probably. Again, it's a great joy to be here, and it's a great joy to see a couple folk here who I've known for almost 50 years. Some of you know who you are. Uh, and I remember, being the younger roommate to Jay McDaniel once upon a time, and certainly Rebecca Parker sharing the Loomer seminar once upon a time when we were younger, at least in age, though not in spirit. And it's good to see some of my students here who have become peers and who have superseded me in many ways in their wisdom and thoughtfulness. I think process and open relational theologies are in good hands after some of us leave the stage, and that's good news. Well, a renewed faith is a passionate faith. It's an inspiring faith that fills us with the spirit of the psalmist, one that I say every time when I'm leading worship. This is the day that God has made, and let us rejoice and be glad in it. And one that we might begin just in a sense of prayer and take a deep breath. And perhaps on this day in a week that already seems like it's lasted a year, let the Spirit of God fall upon us that we might, as Brian McLaren says, have defiant joy. And as John Lewis says, make a little good theological trouble and see where it takes us. Amen. Well, some of you know this story. It's an encounter of two North African monks, Abba Lot and Abba Joseph. And Abba Lot comes to see Abba Joseph looking for wisdom, and he says some of the things that perhaps you say. As far as I'm able, I follow my daily office. I fast a little. I pray and meditate. I live in peace as far as I can, and I purify my thoughts. And the elder Abba Joseph stands up and stretches his hands out, and flames come forth from his hands, and exclaims, "If you will, why not become fire? Why not become fire? Why not be filled with Pentecostal passion? Why not join a deep encounter with God with a faith that transforms the world?" As Irenaeus said, the glory of God is a person fully alive. So why don't we ask to become fully alive in body, mind, spirit, and commitment to becoming God's companions in healing the world? We all know this, that today's congregational leaders, whether they're lay or ordained, need each in their own ways, a fiery spirituality that joins contemplation and action, that hears God's voice and then goes out into the world with a message of love, hospitality, healing, and justice. We need a bit of fire to see the light in ourselves and be lights in the world, lights of love and justice, to face the challenging time in which we live. We need the fire of studies, spiritual practice, social activism, healing and wholeness, and practical pastoral care. Now, one of my mentors, I was grateful that I studied with him twice, at least in short sessions, Howard Thurman, once said, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, and then go do it." Because what the world needs is persons who have come alive. What the world needs is progressive and open-spirited Christian leaders and congregants and congregations to come alive with spiritual energy and to share that in their personal, spiritual, national, and planetary lives for the transformation in this time of national crisis and global crisis. The world needs our head, heart, and hands. The world needs our passion for justice and healing, and the wisdom born of study, reflection, empathy, and experience. The world needs our persistence and resilience, our defiant joy and resistance to tip the future toward the better angels of our nature, in our nation, and in the planet. It may seem bold for us to do so, but we need to claim Jesus' affirmation that we are the light of the world, and then let our light shine. And we also need, and we need this in light of today's news and the news of the past few days, and nothing's really changed over the past years, but they become more exacerbated now. Now, the claim that God loves us, all of us, in our faltering weariness, despair about the future. And there's nothing we can do about it. God loves us, and we can't change that. And that God's love inspires us to move forward in our own way, the moral and spiritual arcs of history amid our struggles. The one thing that I struggle with, and perhaps you, is the belief that I matter today. But yet, we matter one act and moment at a time. We don't have to change the world this evening or this afternoon in California. We do have to do one act at a time, over and over and over. Now, Sheri made some wonderful perceptive comments and analysis of this time. It's an honor to be her professor once upon a time, and to see her well exceed me along the pathway. And in light of what Sheri said, many of us are ashamed. We are ashamed of the public witness of our fellow Christians, even in the public witness to an Episcopal bishop who spoke the words of Jesus the other day. And that adds to the stress of ministry, doesn't it? Doesn't it add to the stress of ministry to know about other Christians? When we must regularly convince seekers that we are not anti-science, anti-LGBTQ+, anti-woman, anti-intellectual, anti-democratic, anti-pluralism, anti-environmentalism, and we are not political cheerleaders for idolatry and retribution. Even our rainbow flags and Black Lives Matter signs, and we need to put those up in great abundance, and then some, fail to convince seekers that we aren't like the Christians who regularly practice a theological bait and switch of preaching about loving Jesus and then introducing a wrathful God and a rule-based religion through the side door. And very few people have talked about that better than Rita Nakashima Brock and Rebecca Parker, by the way. So go read their book. In this time, how do we keep our passion in a maelstrom of religious and cultural challenge? How do we nurture our vocation as spiritual leaders in whatever role we find ourselves? How do we stay open to the evolving relationship of our gifts and the world's needs? How do we avoid, in the spirit of Jesus' parable? And this was one of the things that the group's advertising, he kept reminding us. How do we keep ourselves in that parable of the seeds to avoid our own plant being choked by the weeds of ministry in a challenging, conflictual, and crisis-ridden world? Amid the challenges of ministry, we would do well to remember the words of Viktor Frankl, describing how he survived the horrors of Nazi concentration camps and became a pioneer in psychology. Forces beyond your control can take away everything you possess except one thing: your freedom to choose how you will respond to the situation. That's our freedom. That's the freedom we talk about in process theology and open relational theology, the freedom to respond to the situation. In the spirit of Frankl, we need to remember that even a little light, just a little light, can pierce the darkness, the gloom, and provide a way forward. We can be, and we're tempted to be, to keep our heads down and stay out of trouble. We're tempted to be passive victims of forces we can't control or think we can't control. You know, in the hymn God of Grace and God of Glory by Harry Emerson Fosdick, he says words that have spoken to me for the last 4 days. Save us from weak resignation to the evils we deplore. Save us from weak resignation to the evils we deplore. Or we can become agents of our destiny and God's adventure, letting our lives be guided by God's loving eros, the passionate movements of the moral and spiritual arcs of history in our lives and in the world. Ministry is a matter of call and response, of grace and agency. In each moment, we can choose to align ourselves with the moral and spiritual arcs of the universe and choose life for ourselves, our companions, and our congregations. In a process and relational world, an open relational world, we're never entirely victims of the past and present events of our lives. We can be agents of our destiny and participate in God's aim at personal, congregational, national, and planetary wholeness, embodying Fosdick's rejoinder to weak resignation. Let the gift of your salvation be our glory evermore. Grant us wisdom, grant us courage, serving you who we adore, serving you who we adore. Speaking specifically of ordained ministry, and this applies to all sorts of church leaders, not just ordained ministers, most ministers enter ministry to become spirit persons. Can I have a witness out there? Is that true? Hallelujah. We went into ministry to be spirit persons who have heard God's call and God's vision and vocation to join our gifts with the world's needs. And we have responded as Isaiah did. Here I am, send me. Any of you remember those moments? Where we felt a sense of our vocation, where we discovered that we could do work for God and it mattered. We are called to be spirit persons. Marcus Borg. Now I see renewing ministry in our communities involving the interplay of vision and promise and practice. This spiritual and theological trinity involves opening to grace and choosing to deepen our intellectual, spiritual, and ethical lives and embracing practices of wholeness. Vision. It's a framework for interpreting the joys and sorrows of life and discerning where we are in relationship to the challenges of our time, the scope of our freedom and agency. Vision involves how we understand God's Spirit moving in our lives. Theology changes lives, and a theological shrouded spiritual vision transforms us and transforms the world. Promise. This is the biggest deal of them all. This is the center of the Holy Trinity here. As a preacher, and I'm a preacher, I try to preach a couple times every month at our church. And as a teacher, our theology makes a promise. The promise of our theology is people can experience what we talk about. Don't read the recipe, give people the cake. Don't talk about the ingredients, make a hoagie. We have a theology that makes a difference, that's concrete, that changes lives, that fulfills its promise. And finally, practices. Ways to align ourselves to the graceful and sometimes restless movements of God's holy adventure in the world. The daily diet. Everybody needs a little diet of spiritual practices, after all, that nourish, energize, empower, and illuminate every aspect of our lives and ministries. Now, I won't attempt a full-fledged description of a vision to renew our faith, but simply say, for me, in very practical, not particularly theological, astute words, that vision involves at least 3 bold and evolving affirmations. You've heard them all, but repetition is a good thing. God in all things in God. The infinite is the intimate, or as the Gospel of Thomas says, cleave the wood, and I am there. God is at work in our lives, inviting us to constant renewal and growth in wisdom and stature and compassion and creativity. What we do matters to God, and God needs us. We're the hands, the feet of God, as Teresa of Avila says, and we can be partners in healing the world. God in all things in God. The second, which become a mantra for me over the years, I use it in the pastoral prayers when I'm given the opportunity to do them at our congregation, Westmoreland Congregational United Church of Christ in Bethesda, Maryland. God is a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. That'll preach. God is a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. You are at the center of God's love. And so is everyone else. If you were the only center, that'd be bad news, wouldn't it? That'd be the sort of narcissism we see among politicians, isn't it? Only I can do this. God is a circle whose center is everywhere, and whose circumference is nowhere. That calls us to wake up to the Spirit and embrace the love that guides the stars and ourselves. That God's love is unbounded, all-inclusive, and all-compassionate. That God's prophetic challenge aims at healing not just the oppressed, but also the oppressor. In our eagerness to tell the world how bad things are, just look at Facebook, we need to also remember that that red-hatted MAGA person is also God's child. Otherwise, as the Who says, and the Who's a source of great wisdom, Sheri could tell us that. Here comes the new boss, just like the old boss. We have to be people who fight hard, but also love hard. The final of this trilogy is from Henry Nouwen, who's a wealth of wisdom, I think, certainly to me. Beloved, broken, and blessed. The three B's. Beloved, broken, and blessed. We are children of love. And I've canonized this person, so I guess I'm able to do this. Saint Pelagius, I've canonized him. Saint Pelagius, he's now on dual ordination track with Augustine, so we need a diet of both Augustine and Pelagius. Says that every newborn comes into the world bearing the face of God. Every newborn comes into the world bearing the face of God. That's you, right? That itty bitty baby bears the face of God, and so does that narcissistically troubled politician who never smiles at all. He also bears the face of God. We are limited and fallible, and yet in our imperfection, we are loved and still invited toward the abundant life for ourselves and the world. God blesses our feeblest attempts at bringing beauty and justice to the world and brings forth from our collective imperfection and inspiration, commitment, and compassion. A great harvest, as Jesus says, that feeds the world in body, mind, and spirit. These affirmations lift up an ever-present, ever-inspiring, all-embracing, intimate and personal God, and remind us that we are God's beloved children who confess our limitations of vision and morality, and yet are blessed in our imperfection to be invited to be agents of destiny, healing the world in tandem with God and others, one moment, one act at a time. This is a vision that inspires us to practice the presence of God, embrace our whole selves, as Sheri says, accept grace in our imperfection, and do, as Mother Teresa, Saint Teresa of Calcutta says, do something beautiful for God. That's good Whitehead, too, because the teleology of the universe is aimed at the production of beauty, and we can do something beautiful for God. And we already have. We've sung songs. We've seen each other's faces. We've made fun quips on the chat line. This is a renewing vision that we can nurture through prayer and meditation. Spiritual affirmations, heartfelt study, healthy living, therapy and spiritual formation, and empathy and action in the world. And so we might sing, this little light of mine. Sing it to me, brothers and sisters. I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm going to let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm going to let it shine. Wherever I go, I'm going to let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Glory, hallelujah. Thank you, Jesus. It's good to be here tonight.
Well, amen, Bruce. Thank you very much.
Well, the Spirit is upon us this evening.
The Spirit is upon us.
Revival time and process world.
That's right. That's right. So we've got a little bit of time for conversation. And I want to respond to a couple of things that you said, and then certainly, jump back at me on whatever you want. But a couple of things. You mentioned God's loving eros, and that just reminded me of how I often think about. We in this type of theology, we talk about God as persuasive, not coercive, and we talk about God luring us toward future possibilities. But I always think about how what attracts people is joy, not threat. And so I think of like Jesus as like a joyful magnet that drew people to him because he was so transparent with the light and so full of life that he just drew people to him like a magnet versus the the fire and brimstone preachers that threaten us don't attract me. I mean, maybe they might attract other people, but they are not appealing. They don't attract me. And so, I think too about the way, because, I also want to respond and say, I know that there are a lot of people in our communities of process and open and relational that might all be in alignment with certain ideological viewpoints, but I'm not willing to say that we all are. And so I want to be sure that we are not making assumptions in this conference about anybody's politics, and that we welcome you regardless of where you stand, regardless of your approach to that, because we know that all of our ideologies are limited. None of them see the whole picture. And so, like, I just think about Whitehead saying that it's more important that a proposition be interesting than that it be true. And
Lots of interesting ones.
so many people in the progressive world, kind of fall into this trap, this sort of technocratic trap, that just if we just keep throwing more facts at people, or if we just keep, throwing more information and data out there, that people will be convinced to this or that way of thinking. And we've lost the spirit. We've lost that sense of life and of joy. And so, I just want to remind us that way of understanding that there's this eros, this passionate joy at the heart of things. And if we can tap into that, that's more attractive, and we'll have more folks coming alongside us than if we threaten them or yell at them or insult them or call them deplorables or call them other bad names that you hear from all sides in the political discourse. So I want to be sure that we don't think that way in this gathering this weekend, and that we also, call out our passions, what we're passionate about, what we believe in strongly, and in our conversations. So, Bruce, what would you say to that, or to anything else that we've
Oh,
brought up
well,
this evening?
you gave me a feast of discourse there, Sheri. Uh, and I think you're right on target. I think that Reinhold Niebuhr is a theologian that's influenced me a great deal. And some people wake up in the morning and decide they're going to write something. I'm one of those people. I've only got 3 or 4 thoughts that I haven't written about so far. And I'm thinking that someday I'll write a little book on Reinhold Niebuhr. And Reinhold Niebuhr makes this wonderful comment to look for the truth in my neighbor's falsehood and the falsehood in my own truth. That, if we're talking process and relational or open and relational thought, it's about the concreteness of life, which always has some limitation to it. But the possibilities emerge in the limitation. I often, live my theology by hymns, sometimes to the chagrin of my wife, who's gone upstairs, I think, to avoid hearing me sing. But there's one of these old spirituals that speaks to me. It's me, O Lord, it's me, O Lord, standing in a need of prayer. As long as you remember you're standing in the need of prayer, it will take the sort of self-righteousness or righteousness that can be characteristic of all parties. Now, that doesn't mean you don't call your representative. That doesn't mean you don't protest. There's a sign in Kirkridge Retreat Center up in Bangor, Pennsylvania, Northeast Pennsylvania, that says, picket and pray. I've often felt that was good advice. Or as Abraham Joshua Heschel says when he's marching with Martin Luther King, I felt like my legs were praying. And the passion you talk about, again, when I was growing up and becoming interested in politics, and this was the first election I knew something about really was when Kennedy was elected in 1960, because my father was a big Nixon supporter. But later on, there became a politician, Hubert Humphrey, used to be referred to as the happy warrior. Or as Brian McLaren more recently says, to have defiant joy. Again, I've been very interested in the spirituals of America's slave communities. They're people who've lived in great trial and tribulation, and yet there's great joy in those spirituals. There's great joy. I got shoes, you got shoes. All God's children got shoes. And then, of course, not everyone who says they're going to go to heaven is going, as that's the little rejoinder in the song, Keep Us Honest. Joy. Again, I think that most of us who go to church don't need somebody to go like this all through the service. We may need to have our comfort afflicted from some time to time, but I remember what Clayton Gooden, who was one of my training pastors back in 1979, I'm really that old, doing my internship and writing my dissertation in Tucson, Arizona, reminded the thing that somebody in church that Sunday when you're preaching, somebody's just been diagnosed with cancer. Somebody's just buried their spouse. Somebody's dealing with issues of depression. So even when you preach a word of conviction, you have to preach a word of grace. You have to tell folks that God loves them, they matter, and you can do something beautiful with your lives just as you are. That's enough for me now.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I've seen a lot of people in the chat talking about relationality of what persuades hearts and minds from Sandra Nixon, not facts and more information. We've got a little activity around Augustine versus Pelagius. That's always
Well, they both can get a yes on certain things.
uh-huh. Yeah.
Even Augustine had a few good days.
I loved the book by Elaine Pagels, Adam, Eve, and the Serpent,
Yeah.
where she talks about that whole discussion around original sin. And it was a student of Pelagius who was in debate with Augustine, I think, and I forget the name of him, but who was basically saying that there was nothing that humans could do to change the nature of nature itself, that
Yeah.
humans couldn't bring death into the world by anything that they did. And that made so much sense to me. But Elaine Pagels sort of argued that it was important for that the reason that people were so interested and accepted Augustine's view of original sin was because they couldn't bear the idea that things could happen randomly. So such great suffering and bad things could happen randomly, and so they would rather believe that that it was their fault, that they did something that caused the suffering to happen. Now, what I've started talking about lately, and this was an inspiration I came to recently that I'm just so fascinated by. I've been writing some more about this, is the idea that sin, to me now, I see it as the illusion of separation.
Yes, yes.
And so sinful behavior that is acting from this illusion of separation. And so then I see original sin as the necessary illusion of separation, that we have to have the illusion of separation in order to have a world that has embodiment. We could not have relationality. We could not have a world if there was not a sense of multiplicity and things being separate. But it at its core is the wholeness. And so it's an illusion of separation, but it's necessary for this world to exist. But we
Well,
just
I think
need to live out from that.
that's very wise, Sheri. I appreciate that. And of course, if once in a while I can quote Whitehead, so folks still think I know a little Whitehead. Uh, that religion begins with solitariness. Whitehead says that, and yet he's the most socially, uh, intricately social philosopher. They're both. There is that moment of privacy. There is that moment that no one but God knows at one level.
Right.
Yet there is that sense that it's all together too. I mean, I think that the great challenges of our time is to get that balance of we've become imbalanced in this area toward individualism and isolationism, I believe. That's become sort of the sense that what I do, and this is both the individualism of the left and the individualism of the right, that I have a right to do anything that I believe I want to do. It's my freedom. I think that the process and relational viewpoint is that it's our freedom and God's freedom and the universe's freedom, and they all fit together. I like the Southern African language often invoked by Desmond Tutu, Ubuntu. I am because of you. We are because of one another. Or long before him, of course, and uh, Gautama Buddha wouldn't have had any trouble with this. The Apostle Paul says that we're all part of the body of Christ. That's shown up in the lectionary recently
Yeah.
that we all have this sense of connectedness, that this sense of diversity is also the sense of unity. And that in community, our calling is to uplift the gifts of everyone and to honor those gifts. Long before it became political, God was the originator of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's just simply built into the universe. And certainly 1 Corinthians 12 is the ultimate passage of that point. We help others. Everybody matters. The least of them may be just as important. Nobody thinks about a cell until it's cancerous.
Hmm. Right. Right.
Nobody notices their toe until they stub it.
Isn't that the truth?
And so the least important things are sometimes the most important things. And I think we've got the illusion that greatness comes from being somehow at the top of the pinnacle, the smartest or the wealthiest ones, the most privileged, when the ones that's dependent upon all these other things going on. The person who makes sure I have water is the most important person, probably. Person who makes sure I've got vegetables is the most important person. The person who stocks them at the local Trader Joe's or Giant or Wegmans is that most important. In the body of Christ, they all matter. And that's a wonderful thing for church. And as Tom Ord says, yeah, the negative feelings are easy. Boy, tell me about it. Tell me about it. We're magnets of negativity too, right?
Yeah, well, speaking of that, I wanted to answer Tom's question, and we are gonna just have a few more minutes before we take a break. Um, but two things come to mind, Tom, when you talk about this importance of feelings, and yet we can have a negative feeling or a negative response to people or situations. First is that I'll throw a little Jung at you. So much of what triggers us or what yanks our chain is projection. It's when we are seeing out in the world something that we've not acknowledged in ourselves. And I think so one step is to acknowledge within us the narcissist, the sociopath, the one who uh you know wants to do negative things, whatever it is. There's always that capacity in us, even if we don't act it out. That capacity is within us. So because we're all human, we all have it. So I think, may begin by just acknowledging that capacity is in me too, and being willing to look inside and say, what part of me is like that. um
Yes.
but also, just there's that sense of flow of again of that a flow of process, that what we feel in our bodies needs to move through us. It needs to be felt. It needs to not be um denied and buried, because then it just festers and causes us to be ill. Jung said that the unconscious material that we don't work with comes to us as illness or fate. And
Yeah.
so it's important that we allow what we feel in any situation to be flowing like that river. And then, to me, I think, is when we then allow that to flow, that we can actually be in the moment and listen for what the Spirit asks us in terms of response to that situation. And if we are stuck, if we are judging, one of the things that I never really understood until in Buddhist thought, until I read Paul Nitter's book, without the Buddha, I couldn't be a Christian.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly not going to say this as if this is what he said, but what it prompted in me was, the idea that I never really understood the idea of not judging, of not, I forget what the actual term is in the Buddhist philosophy about, witnessing what reality is, but not judging it. Because to me, that I finally realized that if we are labeling something that's happening as good or bad or whatever, we are like, it's as if we're concretizing and freezing that situation in place and then are turning off the spigot of the Spirit. But when we say, okay, this is what's here, this is what's happening, then I can still continue to listen. I can say, I'm going to feel what I feel for this, but I'm going to let it pass through me. And I'm going to then listen for the response. What is the best way to respond? So that's just what I would, how I would respond to that question.
Yeah, that's very astute. I was thinking of a poem by Thich Nhat Hanh, "Call Me by My True Names." It's well worth the read. Call me by my true names. There is something of all of that in each of us. We may not be the people we hate or dislike or whose policies we hate, but there is in the mosaic of life, we are connected in such a way that we are not other than one another. And as Sheri says, there is a certain sense of anger. I would call it righteous anger, the seeing of injustice. Again, I commend to Howard Thurman's book Jesus and the Disinherited, or my book on Thurman, Prophetic Healing, where the prophet can be a healer as well, and that we sometimes need to be angry. And Psalm 139 is, of course, the classic, which oftentimes doesn't show up when it's excerpted and when one puts it in a liturgy because it's too raw. Yeah, but we all know the part of Psalm 139 that goes, search me and know me. That if I go into the heights, you are there. If I go into the depths, you are there also, and so forth. Then toward the end of the psalm, the psalmist says, "Oh, how I hate them. I hate them with a holy hatred. I wish they'd be dashed their heads into as stones." And then the psalmist is recalled back to a certain type of mindfulness, which doesn't deny those feelings, but says, "Search me and know if there's any wicked way within me, and lead me on the path everlasting." You don't, I mean, Jung could have taken a lesson from Psalm 139 about the shadow and embracing it. And no doubt he did, since he was copious and compendious in his awareness. But think again, one of the things about a relational universe is that we cannot act as if the others' lives don't touch us. I think Jay McDaniel says it about as well as anyone. He and I have dialogued about this, and I've learned a lot from him here. The importance of trying to know the other's feelings and let the other's feelings become almost your own, while yet not losing your center. Bernie Loomer talked about it as size, to hold those feelings in contrast. Because passion doesn't come from denial. Passion does not come from denial. So the person, Howard Thurman, who writes about the need for passion, grew up in Jim Crow, Alabama, Jim Crow, Florida, and Daytona Beach. grew up there. He knew what it was like to be second class. He had to scrape for every penny he got to take a bus to one of the move away from home to go to one of the 3 high schools open to black folks in Florida in the early 20th century. He knew plenty about the evil, I'll call it for what it is, the evil of Jim Crow and the lynching tree. But yet there was a passion that came from his sense of the holiness of life deep down, and that you can shock the unjust, but the unjust, your shocking of the unjust is shocking them into seeing themselves as God's child who needs you as much as you need them.
Great. Well, let's end that there, Bruce, because I realize that before we go to our break, there's another couple things I just want to share. But let me thank Bruce Epperly, great theologian, very prolific and amazing author. Has just been such an appreciated voice in this process community, an open and relational community, and out there in the broad world. So thank you, Bruce, for an engaging, wonderful conversation. I really appreciate you and so glad that you're here with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We'll definitely hear from you again throughout this conference. So before we take our break, after that break, what's coming up next is our big conversation about renewing God. And I just want to say a couple things about it and then share a video. We're going to share a video with you. How we think about God is basically how we think about ultimate reality. So in ultimate reality, in whatever worldview we have, grounds everything, it grounds everything we'll be talking about in this conference as it relates to Christianity. So, over the last several decades, as I mentioned earlier, we've seen participation in religion and church plummet, and many of us don't identify with traditions, or many people don't anymore. And this brings to mind for me the famous quote of theologian Karl Rahner, who said, "The Christian of the future will be a mystic or will not be a Christian anymore." And in recent years, when I hear scientists talk about the quantum world or panpsychism or consciousness studies or the entangled spooky action at a distance that they've witnessed, it seems to me that the scientists sound more and more like mystics every day. And the metaphysical worldview that process and open and relational theologies are grounded in sees our cosmos, as I've been saying, as one in which everything is related to everything else. You heard that in my song, "We All Are Related." And so now we're going to show a video that tells you that same idea scientifically. And it was released several years ago by John Boswell, a Washington-based electronic musician who's created a series of videos under the name Symphony of Science. And this one features some very familiar scientists, and it's called "We Are All Connected." And we'll just play this video, and then we'll take a 15-minute break. It'll start a little bit after 8 Eastern. Again.
We're all connected to each other biologically, to the earth chemically, to the rest of the universe atomically.
I think nature's imagination is so much greater than man's. He's never gonna let us relax.
We live in an in-between universe where things change alright, but according to patterns, rules, or as we call them, laws of nature.
I'm this guy standing on a planet. Really, I'm just a speck. Compared with a star. The planet is just another speck. To think about all of this, to think about the vast emptiness of space. Billions and billions of stars, billions and billions of specks. The beauty of a living thing is not the atoms that go into it, but the way those atoms are put together. The cosmos is also within us. We're made of star stuff. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself.
Across the sea of space, the stars are others. We've traveled this way before, and there is much to be learned.
We're all connected to each other biologically, to the earth chemically, to the rest of the universe atomically.
I find it elevating and exhilarating to discover that we live in a universe which permits the evolution of molecular machines as intricate and subtle as we.
I know that the molecules in my body are traceable to phenomena in the cosmos. That makes me want to grab people in the street and say, have you heard this?
The beauty of a living thing is not the atoms that go into it, but the way those atoms are put together. The cosmos is also within us. We're made of star stuff. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself.
There's this tremendous mass of waves all over in space, which is the light bouncing around the room, going from one thing to the other, and it's all really there, really there. But you gotta stop and think about it, about the complexity to really get the pleasure. It's all really there, really there. The inconceivable nature of nature. To think about all of this, to think about the vast emptiness of space. Billions and billions of stars, billions and billions of specks.
The beauty of a living thing is not the atoms that go into it, but the way those atoms are put together. The cosmos is also within us. We're made of star stuff. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself. Across the sea of space, the stars are others. We've traveled this way before, and there is much to be learned.